Hi, so hopefully you enjoyed the second episode where we talked about this proximity alert too far. We're now going to go into the third component that we've identified, the third and final one for this little mini series, which we've identified as too many unknowns. So please join us now for proximity alert number 3, too many unknowns.
And then,
Great.
yeah.
So talk to us about too many unknowns. What's that about?
Yeah, well, this third point. I mean, we all know that change. It's like over the last decade or so, we've gone from change management as a thing that, oh yeah, we can probably make a bit of business out of going in and helping organisations go through periodic change. And what's been happening, as with so many things in the world, is that there's been an acceleration in this. So we now find ourselves in a situation where change actually is now the permanent thing. So it's like we're going through permanent change all of the time. And that was maybe 2 months ago. We're now in this situation where there's permanent change has been thrust upon us. But because there's such a set of unknown situations and circumstances that we're now in, that people cannot predict what's going to happen even a week away, let alone 6 months or a year or 3 years away. So the thought of trying to create budgets and trying to create forecasts, what have you, is become an increasingly difficult thing to do. So I'd say what we're talking about here is the proximity of unknowns. And I was reading something, I think it was a PwC study that is done every 2 years on the how confident leaders are of hitting their financial goals. And 2 years ago, the result of that was that roughly 2/3, and this is a poll of several thousand leaders across different sectors across the globe, and of those, the people that were polled, and it was, as I say, several thousand, about 2/3 of them were confident, said that they were confident at hitting their financial targets. So PwC did a similar thing. I think this was just at the end of last year, and that had flipped on its head. So now it was 2/3 of the leaders were saying that they were unconfident in hitting their financial targets, and that was before we've come into the situation that we're now in, where we're now in a world that really nobody can predict or know really what's going to be. So I think this is this thing of the proximity of unknowns, and what do we do in the midst of that as leaders who, well, people are still looking for us for answers, but also, of course, we've got shareholders and boards and what have you asking, saying that we still need to respond in a certain way. So there we are, we're in the middle of this situation where we've got a whole unknown playing field in front of us, and yet we've still got demands upon us to, come up with results and come up with outcomes. So what do we do in the midst of that?
And the answer is, I mean, I think in many ways this is actually the hardest issue. So there's so much uncertainty now. I was talking to my neighbour over the fence this morning, and really no one knows what's going on. I think the little bit of advice that we want to offer here is, and you can challenge us if you like, is that we never really do. Yes, we're living in unprecedented change right now, and this permanent change that you talked about, Rob. But actually, the reality is, I lived in the Middle East for 5 years. They have this wonderful saying, "Inshallah," God willing, that it just acknowledges that we aren't really in control. And it used to frustrate me no end, as trying to launch a business there, yes, we're going to plan this and we're going to do it. And the team would say, well, inshallah. I'm like, well, no, we're definitely going to do this. But the reality is sometimes we do what we're definitely going to do, and sometimes we don't. And we're in this, what we're learning here, the lesson, I think, is vulnerability. And that actually we are really vulnerable. And we're vulnerable whether we know it or not. So this is an opportunity, I think, to actually just kind of face that vulnerability and embrace it. And I think if we take that attitude, then actually we can actually start to be more optimistic and less fearful. George, any thoughts on that one? Or you guys?
Yeah, I think that it is a very, difficult, to be very realistic. It is a scary, question, and especially because there are so many unknowns. For
Mm,
how long will that last? And we know some businesses that they cannot afford, uh, this to be lasting another day, yet alone 3 weeks or 3 months, or a year, or what have you. It's almost like, the entire humanity is having to re-envisage and reimagine how they would need to survive now. So there is this sense of, as well, the solidarity. There is this sense of, we're not alone in this. There are other
mm,
people, and actually, if we look at it, especially in the United Kingdom. I mean, God bless, our government. They are trying to do so hard to compensate, and the 80%, that they gave for wages, to cover wages, and the VAT, and there's so much that our government is doing, and taking that in also, perspective of what other nations might not be doing or might be doing as well. I think it does help, us
yeah.
understand that we are in a vulnerable place. We are in a place where, we need to survive. But again, knowing that we will, there is hope, and we will pass through this. Kingdom rise,
Mm,
kingdom fall, and kingdom rise, and yet we survive, and if that, within all these uncertainties, there is hope at the end of the tunnel.
that's
Yeah.
right. We got to keep hope. We got to keep
Yes.
hope.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So, Rob, any closing thoughts from you, and then I'll wrap us up.
Yeah. I mean, just on this, we know that the workplace has had to embrace this notion of agile working. That's
Mm,
something that's come out of the digital world, which, well, we'll go into that another time if need be. But I think for me, one of the challenges for leadership these days is needing to be agile as leaders. And it's almost like we're having to embrace two ends of a spectrum. One is, and I think we'll talk about this on a future broadcast, is what we're calling cluster leadership.
yeah.
And that's the reality that you as the leader may not, and probably unlikely to have the solution. And that's, we're in a situation now where there's so many unknowns. Even if you've got to a position where, because of the experience you've had and what have you, it may be that there's somebody else in your team, or even outside associated with your team, who's got the answer to the particular problem that you're looking at. So on the one hand, I think as leaders, we need to be much more open to seeking and accepting input from other areas within our teams and outside of our teams. But then also, I think, as we're actually seeing from the government at the moment, there is a greater demand for what I'd call top-down leadership, because people are looking for points of certainty. So even though leadership has changed over, the last few decades, and we've come across, transformational leaders and servant leadership, where this sort of bottom-up sense of leadership, I think there is also increasingly a place now for sort of certainty. So leaders who are prepared to stand up and say, look, we don't know, this is our best guess, and this is the direction that we're going in. So that actually requires, within the same person, two different characteristics, if you like.
Yeah.
And so I think that agility, which we've seen within industry, is now we're having to embrace that as individuals, particularly as leaders. So we need to be agile to know, to use that metaphor, which hat we need to be wearing at any particular moment. So is it the one that is prepared to sit with a group of people and say, okay, who's got the answer? Or is it the more of the figurehead who stands up and says, okay, we've got our best guess, this is where we're going now, in order to bring some certainty into what we're seeing is very uncertain times.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think that the agility is great. So human agility, right? I need to personalize that agility.
Yeah.
And I love the point, George, you made about hope. Like this is a time for hope, right? And embracing hope. So it's been really great talking to you. I hope you've enjoyed hope you've enjoyed listening to our conversation. We'd love to speak to you or your team in more detail if you'd like. There's a whole bunch of topics that we can cover on transformation, mind and heart connection, and helping people think, particularly in these uncertain times. Just to summarize, we talked about the theme of fear breakers, and we wanted to look at proximity alerts today. That was our topic. So the first thing was this too close. And in response to too close, we're talking about actually just being brave enough to explore your heart. What's actually going on inside you? Because that's the thing that you get to control. That's the thing that you get to change. That's the only real environment we get to manage most effectively. So just be brave in this time to say, well, what's going on inside of me? What's causing these issues right now? Number two is the too far and the trust challenge and these sorts of things. Suddenly my whole team is remote and online. And that's just about actually taking the time to care for people, to connect with them and find out how they're doing in that environment rather than rushing into the transactional work that needs to happen. And just being gracious is a great opportunity to rethink, reimagine, re-envisage, and and actually change business process for the better in these times. And then finally, that whole sort of too many unknowns, and that's actually an opportunity to actually just embrace vulnerability. Vulnerability's been bantered around in the workplace for the last couple of years. Well, now we're all in it. So anyway, with that, we hope this has been helpful for you, and we'd love to have further conversation. We also hope you'll join us for our next episode, which we will advertise very shortly. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Thanks.